All right, everybody, we will go ahead and get started. First and foremost, welcome and thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend it with me, learning about pink slime and how that is intersecting with the upcoming US presidential election in just a couple of weeks here. My name is Ashley Jess. I am a senior intel analyst here at Intel 471. In my role, I've been monitoring all kinds of threats to the many elections that are happening worldwide this year. I've been looking at things like how deepfakes and AI factor into this space, to how Russia, China, and Iran are influencing elections around the world. In the course of this more cyber focused research, myself and a few others here at Intel 471 have come across a different kind of trend, one that we thought was interesting and worth highlighting, even if it's a little bit different from our normals. So we will go ahead and get started. But before we can, I want to make sure that everybody is on the same page about what exactly it is that we are discussing here today. So pink slime journalism involves media outlets, which are typically websites, but there are physical versions as well, which we will show in this presentation. But they are publishing incorrect or intentionally misleading content while falsely appearing as a local news outlet. Often, these media outlets are created specifically to further the political interest of a particular organization, but they do not disclose these ulterior motives or their sources of funding to the reader, who instead believes that they are consuming some trustworthy local news. Interestingly, in June of this year, NewsGuard Technologies, who is a company that rates the quality of information published by news websites, released a report showcasing that the number of pink slime websites has now outnumbered the number of local outlets and daily newspapers still in operation in the United States. So this means that not only do these illegitimate websites now outnumber the legitimate ones, but it means that an avenue has been created in which they can create this unprecedented wave of election-related disinformation and flood the media landscape with biased and false reporting disguised as trustworthy local news. So this particular threat kind of falls into that gap that isn't really clearly foreign election, disinformation campaigns, nor is it a cyber threat, but it's still very impactful, and we thought it was worth highlighting here. I also want to clarify that this is in fact different from foreign influence operations. So one example of a foreign influence operation is Doppelganger. There's been a lot of reports about that group out in the past couple of months. They are a Russian disinformation campaign that has been around since 2022. So Doppelganger, does use inauthentic news sites and social media accounts and AI to create articles, but what Doppelganger is doing is impersonating the authentic domain of a legitimate news organization. So in this image, which is from a report from Clear Sky, you can see they were impersonating the very well-known Washington Post. Whereas when it comes to pink slime, this is an entire news outlet created for the purpose of pink slime. They are not impersonating a pre-existing news agency or outlet. This is created specifically to facilitate misleading information. So that is the difference between the two. All right, so with those definitions out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into where pink slime is now intersecting the upcoming US presidential election specifically. There are numerous pink slime outlets out there. So for this particular webinar, we decided to showcase 4 case studies with 2 examples on each side of the political spectrum in order to show how this is being used across both sides of the aisle, and in our 4 specific examples, showcase some of the varied techniques and indicators these various outlets use to hopefully give you a holistic idea of what this landscape looks like. Our first example here will be Metric Media. This is a large network of pink slime outlets. Metric Media was founded in 2014. In their own words, was created to address the, quote, growing news desert at the local level. They stated that their philosophy was to provide, quote, objective, data-driven information without inserting personal or political viewpoints. In the years since their founding, it has become the sort of poster child for pink slime journalism due to their sheer size. It is estimated that they now operate over 1,000 local news sites across all 50 states and generate thousands of articles each and every day. One of the key individuals affiliated with Metric Media is Brian Timpone, a conservative former journalist who has been at the heart of the pink slime wave for over a decade. Timpone's companies have received funding from conservative political action committees, or PACs, and have provided services to politicians as customers. One of Timpone's affiliated companies has already been embroiled in some controversy during this actual election cycle due to its decision to share personal information of Illinois voters, including full names, addresses, and birthdays on one of its websites. For this particular instance, the Illinois Board of Elections encouraged the Illinois Attorney General to consider legal action and cited unethical behavior around the handling of voter information. Metric Media has been propagating hundreds of advertisements, and they are often provocative and push conservative narratives, as this is a conservative-leaning outlet, particularly around things like Second Amendment rights, immigration, and inflation, as you can see in the images to the right. Now, in the final weeks before Election Day, Intel 471 has observed a notable push by Metric Media in swing states. Using Meta's ad library, we found that Metric Media spent over $215,000 on advertisements appearing on Facebook from June 27th to September 30th of this year, and it's still ongoing now. The majority of that spending has occurred in the key swing states of Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. Now, when you look at an actual Metric Media site, they all have a very common appearance with this simple black and white typeface surrounding repetitive headlines and thumbnails. Like other pink slime reporting outlets, the articles tend to be brief and lack in detail or analysis. However, what they lack in sophistication, they make up for in volume. As I said, Metric Media is a very, very large pink slime outlet, and they have claimed that they publish over 5 million news articles each and every month. Many of the visitors to the Metric Media umbrella of sites will find that the vast majority of their content is at least nominally about local news, but actually conceals a trend of pushing conservative narratives under this guise of impartiality. Now, the landing pages of Metric Media sites paying for additional advertising, in this case the ones that are located in swing states, contain more overt politicized content than the ones that are outside of swing states. This differs, as you can see, between these two images on the screen. The one on the left has pretty blasé headlines, mostly discussing gasoline prices, but the one on the right for Wisconsin's The Scone, upon which Metric Media has spent roughly $40,000 in ads on Facebook from June to September alone, features a lot of headlines questioning the legitimacy of absentee and early ballot voting, and another discussing murder rates among illegal immigrants. We have Star News Digital Media. This is a media and news company that owns and operates the Star News network of digital newspapers. Star News is currently affiliated with 12 media outlets, so significantly smaller than the last example, but their first outlet was the Tennessee Star, which launched in February 2017, which is an incredibly popular news outlet, probably one of the ones that I have seen in my research that has a larger readership base than some of the others. Since 2017, the company has launched some additional outlets in Arizona, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota, South Carolina, Virginia, and Wisconsin. Star News was co-founded by 3 people, Steve Gill, Michael Patrick Leahy, and Christina Botteri, all of whom have been affiliated with the conservative-affiliated Tea Party movement. So this is our second conservative example of the day. The Star stories, despite their claims of neutrality, have a strong conservative bias, I would say stronger than what you saw with Metric Media, and often actually inaccurately present some facts to readers, again, not disclosing any sort of ulterior motive or funding source of their articles. So one example that you can see here on the screen is falsely claiming that Vice President Harris hasn't prosecuted a single case, despite a very well-documented history of her time as California's Attorney General. On their websites, the Star lists an address in Nashville, Tennessee. An interesting thing here, actually, was that several other businesses appear to be located as the same address as the Star. such as Political Financial Management, which is a company that provides advisors for campaign finance management, a Committee to Stop Unfair Sales Tax, and the Latinos for Tennessee. Interestingly, the treasurer for Latinos for Tennessee, Troy Brewer, oversees several conservative PACs, including one called the Tennesseans for Good State Government. This particular individual is also an employee with Political Financial Management and has been the subject of prior controversy. Our review also found an instance of the CEO of Star News, Michael Patrick Leahy, you can see it on the right here, downplaying the U.S. intelligence community's claims of foreign interference in the upcoming presidential election. This particular story was released shortly after a federal indictment revealed that 2 employees from a Russia state-controlled news network known as RT helped launder millions of dollars in payments to a Tennessee-based media company, which has been alleged to be Tenet Media. Tenet Media's podcast has had several high-profile Republican guests on the show, like Laura Trump, Kash Patel, Carrie Lake, and Vivek Ramaswamy. So it's just an interesting kind of downplaying of foreign interference here, which is a trend we've seen across both sides of these pink slime websites. When navigating the Star website in particularly, there is a section on it for state level news, but if you look into it further, almost all of the stories are still political. They don't actually have much local news on there. The vast majority of their articles in the Star media outlets are actually republished from other sources, often without an author's name. So you can see that boxed in the red on the left image there. They actually, most frequently, from what we could tell, redistribute stories from the Center Square, Just the News, and the Daily Caller. The Center Square is a rebrand, actually, of watchdog.org and is affiliated with the Franklin News Foundation, who receives large portions of its revenue from anonymous benefactors via Donors Trust, which is a major source of funding for conservative groups. Just the News was founded in 2020 by John Solomon and is a conservative website. And Solomon was actually formerly a journalist with The Hill, and his reporting specifically has been described as being conspiratorial and pro-Trump. And the Daily Caller is a right-wing website founded by former Fox News host Tucker Carlson in 2010. So you can see a lot of different conservative news sources feeding into this, Georgia news, even when it's in their local news tab, still being political and heavily right-leaning in this particular case. So we'll go ahead and dive in on the other side of the aisle now, and we'll talk about one called the American Independent. So according to their website, the American Independent, or TAI, is a media outlet that, quote, covers important local and national politics. And they state that their goal is to, quote, make political news accessible to everyone, and that they make political news easy to understand, quote, while reporting with integrity and honesty. Currently, TAI's media network consists of 5 outlets focused on Michigan, Montana, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. But previously, it was also affiliated with some outlets in Arizona and Ohio. Those domains now redirect to the main American Independent website if you try to visit those. Details around the American Independent's origins are fairly non-existent on their website and are sparse online in general. But they actually previously operated under the name Share Blue Media. Before it was Share Blue Media, the company was known as Blue Nation Review, which originally launched in 2010. In 2015, it was sold to David Brock, who is a political consultant who founded the media watchdog group called Media Matters for America. In addition to Media Matters for America, Brock founded a Democratic super PAC, so this is a Democratic-leaning outlet, an opposition research group known as American Bridge 21st Century, which funded the American Independent. The website relaunched as Share Blue in September 2016 before eventually rebranding as the American Independent in 2019. Currently, each of the media outlets under TAI's umbrella state that they are a project of American Independent Media, a 501c4 organization. In 2022, NewsGuard researchers claimed that American Independent Media was incorporated in 2022 and that the registration records listed a partner at Elias Law Group, which is a law group that has received millions of dollars so far in 2024 from dozens of different Democratic PACs, candidates, and groups, according to both Federal Election Commission records and the Open Secrets Financial Database. TAI's outlets do not publish stories daily, and they actually often go several days or weeks at a time without a single update. So, on the one hand, this does indicate that TAI is not using generative AI for filler or may not be using RSS feeds to import stories from other organizations, like you just saw with the Star. But when they do author things, many of the authors are out of state journalists, well established in the progressive media sphere, which can be misleading when they are authoring what appears to be local news stories about things like the best place to go see fall foliage. For the political articles, they tend to lean to the left or at the very least cover Republican candidates in a negative light. And they also have left out several significant stories from the latest election cycle, including things like Iran's attempt to influence the elections. Archival captures of TAI and its related media outlet websites indicate that since 2020, TAI has gradually been scaling back mentions of their funding source to their readers, obfuscating their biased perspective in the reporting from their audience. This is especially apparent in their physical papers, as you can see to the right, which they have been mailing out to residents in swing states without residents actually signing up to receive any of them. The articles within the paper cover a range of statewide and local stories as well as political issues. Here is an example of one that was in Nebraska. The local news in Montana did some research into the ones their residents were receiving and claimed that 150,000 Montana households were receiving this physical paper once a month for free without signing up, which was actually making it the largest circulation publication in the state for miles at a time when most legacy news outlets have seen dramatic cuts to staff and drops in leadership. So for many of these people, this is the only paper that they are receiving. When that particular news organization, KTVQ, inquired with the American Independent, there was no comment on how the organization was choosing which households to actually mail the paper to. Similar to the conservative examples I showed, TAI is also advertising on Meta and is also often recycling the same advertisements across each of their media outlets. So here you can see the exact same ads that were used in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. In the most recent instances that we have observed, none of the advertisements that they sent out surrounded local news stories, much like what we saw before. All were political in nature, and in this case had a pro-democratic headline or spin. For this case, the prices were not listed on Meta for these particular advertisements, but based on similar metrics, it's likely that they are also spending thousands of dollars per each advertisement campaign. And the last sort of sample of pink slime that I have for you today is Courier Newsroom. Courier Newsroom claims to be a pro-democracy news network that provides factual, values-driven news and analysis in their own words. Currently, Courier runs 10 media outlets across the US, and notably on their website, they state that they are a public benefit corporation owned by Good Information Inc. and are, quote, supported by a variety of funding sources, including reader contribution, sponsors, and philanthropic and corporate underwriting. The organization has previously received widespread criticism for misleading its readers by failing to disclose its political funding and reporting bias, and has a history of pushing back against the pink slime label. Courier was founded in 2019 by Tara McGowan, a former journalist and the former press secretary for U.S. Senator Jack Reed. She later actually worked on Barack Obama's re-election campaign and directed the digital advertising branch of Priorities USA Action, a super PAC that supported Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. At the time that it launched, Courier received the bulk of its funding from Acronym, a group that actually had an affiliated super PAC called Pacronym, but is now owned by Good Information Inc., which McGowan also has founded. Online, they claim to be, quote, investing in solutions that counter disinformation and increase the flow of good information online. But they have been criticized for large amounts of spending on Facebook advertising in previous election cycles. During the 2024 cycle so far, Courier has also consistently run advertisements on Facebook and Instagram promoting Harris's campaign, as this is a Democratic-leaning outlet. Upon closer inspection across all of their media outlets, we found that they are only running paid advertisements with the outlets that are based in swing states. targeting voters specifically in Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. As we reviewed this, several of the news stories under the local news or culture sections of their media outlet were generic in nature and were often considered more of that listicle sort of format. Other stories were often reposted from legitimate news outlets under a Creative Commons license rather than generate their own material. And further still, some even have a caveat of originally being published by the Good Info Newswire, which is likely related to Courier's parent company, Good Information, Inc. Furthermore, several of the articles repurposed from Good Info had AI caveats like the one we see here, which, to their credit, is more transparency than some of these other outlets, but does highlight the use of AI that is being used to generate filler material across many of these pink slime outlets. The political sections of Courier media outlets have less content reposted from other outlets than what we saw from some of these other organizations. The quantity of it does seem to be lower. Instead, much of their generated content is pro-Harris or anti-Trump. Each of their outlets also has a voter guide section, which contains links for readers to check their voter registration and provides readers with information on mail-in voting. Interestingly, these voter guide sections have a subheading called Information You Need. You can see it on the screen there, that has a series of the outlet's various news articles underneath. We reviewed these voter guide sections and we found that, while this section contains some articles emphasizing the safety of the election or information on how to be a volunteer, for some of these outlets, including ones in swing states, it also contained a seemingly random selection of pro-Democrat or anti-Republican articles. In this same voter guide section, several of Courier's media outlets linked to an article about how the outlet is covering the 2024 election. That was on the past slide over here. And while the state name changes for each outlet, this article is identical in all other aspects and states that their reporting is, quote, focused on what the candidates plan to do for you and your community. Absolutely nowhere in this article is it disclosed that Courier and Good Information, Inc. are funded by Democratic PACs and instead claims that they are, quote, writing for their communities, not simply about them. Interestingly, and similarly to the American Independent, Courier's media outlets also make no mention of any of the numerous indictments or reports regarding Russian and Iranian influence operations involving the upcoming presidential election. So overall, and in conclusion, there are a lot of common kind of tactics that are used across all of these pink slime outlets. Many of these websites are funded by dark money groups who don't have to disclose their donors, which can make tracking all of these very, very difficult. As opposed to all the major news outlets that we examined, none of the above media organizations have registrant information available for their domains, and instead choose to hide behind privacy or anonymization services. So here on the screen, you can see this is the New York Times, and in here you can see that they have their registrant information. We also tried it with the Washington Post, and I selected a random actual local news organization in a swing state, in this case, Pennsylvania, and found the same. But as we go from Metric Media to the American Independent, to Star News, to Courier, you can see they are all hiding behind privacy and anonymization services. Further complicating the sort of tracking issue, these are often outlets that are now further cited in things like political advertisements or other media publications, meaning that these quotes are coming from a biased perspective and then quoted in a legitimate context, making it even harder to combat the influence that these outlets can have. This unprecedented rise in pink slime media outlets is a very troubling challenge, particularly in an election year. As I've mentioned, I've been tracking elections around the world for the better part of 2024, and I've sat in on numerous talks and presentations given by both the federal government, local and state governments, and election officials. And something that they are encouraging a lot of the American public to do that might have concerns about election security is to, and this is as close to a direct quote as I can get from a recent one I sat in on, but essentially pick a single source of truth and follow it. Now, this could be good advice if you are absolutely certain that the news source you are using is completely unbiased. But now, with this pink slime outnumbering real local news, and in the case of places like Montana, being the only newspaper available, how do you know if your local news is actually unbiased or not? That can be difficult, and it is a very complicated challenge not only to tackle in the amount of time left for this election cycle, but in going forward as well. These media outlets, under the guise of neutral, fact based reporting, are consistently blurring the lines between fact and opinion and are piggybacking on the implicit trust and authority the public places in the media industry have as part of a partisan battle for the U.S. information space. These companies are utilizing technology to distribute this information in ways that suit their agendas at a lower cost and faster pace than we have ever seen before, and it is likely only going to increase. What is interesting here is that the US government has resources that are dedicated to detecting, analyzing, and combating foreign influence operations, which often are using this same style of tactics described in this report to shape public opinion. But the irony of these operations that I covered today is that none are illegal because they are domestic. Moreover, as I said, the rapid growth of online platforms and generative AI is going to make this easier and quicker and more believable as time goes on. So when it comes to efforts to regulate the influence of pink slime, it is understandably a very complex issue, both in navigating free speech rights and the need for truthful media regulation and the rights to a free press. Free speech and a free press are the cornerstone of democracy, yet this same freedom is also opening the door for the spread of misinformation. So, as we are witnessing this rapid proliferation of misleading and ideologically driven media, the question then arises, how do we maintain the rights of a free press while also ensuring that the information they are reporting is accurate and trustworthy? Some claim that oversight is necessary here to protect the public from misinformation that can influence public opinion, particularly during critical times such as elections, and they have proposed regulations that include things like transparency in funding sources, labeling of AI content, labeling of biased content, in an attempt to ensure that customers can make informed choices about what they are reading. However, critics are warning that attempts to regulate truthfulness can actually be misused by those in power to silence dissenting opinions or marginalized perspectives, so it is a delicate line to toe. And to be honest, such regulation is straight up not going to happen in time for the upcoming US presidential election. Currently, as it stands, the burden is entirely on the consumer to consume trustworthy media. To do that, readers need to use best practices for media literacy, doing things like using multiple sources to reduce reliance on any single source, investigating your source's history, funding, and ownership, and being wary of news shared via social media postings and advertisements. Here is where I would also, in this particular case with elections, stress one of the main points that has been coming out from CISA and other election officials, which is that if you have questions on election security specifically, you can always ask your local election official or board. Lastly, as I start to wrap up here, I just want to shout out some of the tools and other folks who have covered this space in recent years. Pink slime is not a new topic, as I said up at the top, but it really is interesting in the space of the 2024 election cycle, and we had not seen much coverage for this particular election, which is why we wanted to put this out in order to help people consume media and election information in a way that is well-rounded and understands the threat landscape. I hope that was interesting, enlightening, and informative for you today. As we wrap up here with the last couple of minutes, I will go ahead and take, maybe one or two questions if anybody has them. So I will give a second to see if any pop up in the chat here. Looks like we might have had one that came in while I was talking earlier, asking about how I mentioned AI and deep fakes in the election space, and if we are seeing that this year. We definitely are. I did show the AI example later in the presentation when it came to Courier and how they're using AI to supplement their content and their articles, which is a very real possibility amongst these pink slime outlets. More broadly, deepfakes are being used and have been used in many of the elections around the world. So I believe we have a downloadable piece of content or a blog on our website on some AI threats to the elections. So it is a bit older. I mean, it's from this election cycle, but it changes so rapidly that there are a lot more examples that have come out since then. But if you want to see some of the ones from, Taiwan and India, and Pakistan, and some early ones from the US, it's definitely a piece I think is still worth reading and checking out if that is a topic you find interesting. Looks like similarly, someone else is asking if we have seen. Let's see. If we're seeing Russia, China, and Iran use similar techniques to this, we are not just with the doppelganger campaign impersonating broad news organizations like the Washington Post, but we are seeing some influence campaigns from Russia, China, and Iran pushing out fake stories. It doesn't quite fall under pink slime due to the, financial aspect of how pink slime outlets are funded, but we are definitely seeing influence campaigns from the big three. I do believe we also actually have a blog on our website on that particular topic. So definitely feel free to check that out. If you have interest in geopol and geopolitics, for those of you that might not know, that is a relatively new offering that we have. So please feel free to reach out at the email on the bottom there if you want to talk more geopolitics past that blog on our website. You are more than welcome to reach out with questions and inquiries there. I don't see any else rushing in right now, so I guess with that I will wrap it up. If you are still typing one or have any questions, feel free to reach out to that sales@intel471.com email at the bottom. I'm not on the sales team, but they will get your question to me. Otherwise, you can find me on LinkedIn. I believe we were tagged, or I was tagged in the post that Intel 471 posted about this webinar to begin with. So you can always message me there and I'll happily answer any questions you may have. So with that, thank you again so much for taking the time to sit here with me and learn about pink slime and how to protect yourself against election disinformation. It's so important to stay informed and have reliable news sources. So please stay safe when you're consuming media out there, and we will catch you next time.